live stream is preparing.
There we go. Maybe this will help.
So Debbie, at 7:01, if you will start bringing people in, and Mark and Debbie, if you will, and anybody, just chat, say hi to the people as they're coming in. Okay, the video should be good now. All right. So Mark, in a second, you can start. Debbie, you can start bringing people in whenever you want.
Okay, well, it's 7 o'clock, 7:01 now. All right, here we go.
30 people. There we go.
Come.
Whoopee. Here we all come.
And for those of you who are joining us now, we are doing a live YouTube video. So for those of you who do not want to be on screen, please turn off your video. But we do like to see everybody that we're talking to. So it is your choice. We also are doing an AI companion recording through Zoom. So we get a nice summary of this at the end of the day. Mark, it's up to you. And Debbie, go ahead.
That's good. So welcome, everybody. We're having our monthly climate change environmental meeting. And we're going to start here pretty quickly. Everybody's coming in. We have some really excellent speakers tonight talking about CO₂ pipelines in eminent domain, and that's a problem, and we need to jump on this. So we have some excellent speakers. Let's see, Mark Muehlhausen's trying to get in, but anyway, we'll get you in. So I think maybe, Bill, should we jump over to you to start the NWSOFA thing?
Sounds great.
All right.
Take me about 20 seconds to get this started.
And
so let me know when you can see the correct screen.
there it is.
There it was.
There it was.
And there it went.
Well, you know, I have to do it 2 or 3 times to get this thing correct here. All right. Folks, welcome to NWSOFA, which stands for Northwest Suburbs Organizing for Action Indivisible. Tonight, as Mark said, we've got a great presentation on why eminent domain should be banned for Illinois CO₂ pipelines. So as I said, we are the Northwest Suburbs of Chicago, Indivisible. We are one of 2,700 indivisible chapters nationwide. We are within the top 3% of indivisible chapters in terms of size, with over 9,600 members locally and 23,000 that join us by Zoom for various conferences and meetings every month. So it's really a kind of an interesting thing. The reason we exist is to help you understand the facts, to help you, the attendees, sharpen your arguments when you're making discussions and having discussions with people, and especially important around Thanksgiving table, being careful to know what you want to say and how you say it. And when you go back to your Democratic groups, your indivisible groups, or your Move On or 5051 groups, how you communicate with your attendees. We exist to organize and educate. Our organization is founded on the twin snowflake principles. We have 10 issue groups that we've had for about the last 7 or 8 years. And this last year, with an influx of new people nationwide, we've added 9 new groups. So you can see that we started with our very first group back when Sandy Hook started, and that was gun violence prevention. We moved to healthcare reform, immigration reform, social justice reform, our Stand With Women group, our fiscal and economics group, our election outreach group, and of course, climate change, which today we call climate and environmental. And then we have 2 ROD groups, doing voting rights, elections, and gerrymandering, vote by mail, and the second rod group, which addresses the issue of the day. And there are so many issues of the day, it's kind of crazy. We've added groups like Sorting Soup, Vision Forward, our rallies and protest coordinators ongoing all the time, our candidate interviews, which we just finished our third one for the Illinois 8th, our legislative updates, our how-to hands-on technology review, which we'll have tomorrow, Wednesday at 2 o'clock, to help people who lead groups to understand how to become more effective in communicating with their groups. We also have our Discord group, our Truth Brigade team, and our Sharing Our Stories, which we call SOS. And then on the left-hand side, you can see how we over-communicate many times to all of you, but we want to make sure that you know what is actually happening. We have a team of 30 all volunteer leads that help lead both the issue teams and the communications groups. Today, if you were to take a scan or that picture of that QR code, it will take you to our link tree, which allows you to flip very quickly in between our websites, our sign-up forms, our Substacks, our YouTubes, our Blue Sky, any and many different ways. I did mention Substack. Every day we post a Substack article. Usually it comes from either an issue team like tonight or a coffee and conversation group, which meets every morning, Monday through Friday. As I said, this is being recorded on a YouTube Live. You can see the last 6 that we did in the last 5 days or 4 days here, how they appear up there on the very top side. There will be a question and answer after the presentation. But if you have a question and you don't want to lose that question, type in the chat question, all caps, and Debbie will be picking up those. And when the hosts finish their presentation, they will ask for questions. Debbie will read the questions that you have posted, and you may be asked to expand a little bit. You can also raise your hand at that time and be recognized. With that, we are ready to go. Mark Lenholm, who is our lead for climate and environmental change, take it away.
I'll say it's really interesting to note that back in the day, we used to meet in little meeting places live. It was before COVID, and it's gradually grown, and Zoom and the internet have helped create this. But we started out small, and it's not so small anymore. We have a national reach. People are zooming in from all over the country and sometimes internationally. But enough about that. So we have 2 great presenters tonight who agreed to come on. Kathleen Campbell and Richard Stuckey are going to talk about this topic. And so we'll let them start their presentation and get your questions ready, everybody. And thanks for coming. So Richard and Kathleen, are they unmuted? They are unmuted. And Richard, you could start, I guess.
Yep, just a second. I will share my screen.
There
You see
we
that
go.
now?
Good.
Okay, just a second. Get you organized. Kathy, I think you are the first up. Where's Kathy gone to?
Did we lose Kathy by chance?
Is she freezing? She said she was freezing up a little bit.
Okay, well,
We did lose her.
I'll do a quick one until she catches up with us then. Good evening, everybody. Thank you very much indeed for coming this evening. We've got a lot of material to share with you this evening. We'll try and keep it as simple and straightforward as we can do, but it's a sort of complicated subject in some way, and the argument behind this is not exactly straightforward. It's somewhat convoluted, but it's a matter of the best we can do in the circumstances in some cases. So Kathy was going to be, come on. Oh, come on. Now what's wrong? Just a second. Okay.
Could she
There
be
we go.
Motorola Razr 2023? I have an inquiry.
What was that?
We just had somebody in the chat as Motorola Razr 2023. Does Kathy have any of that type of device by chance?
I don't know. I'll let her come back and introduce herself in a moment. I'll just start off with my little briefly. I'm one of the founders of a small not-for-profit called Save Our Illinois Land, which was set up maybe 10 years ago or more now, for the purpose of fighting fossil fuel infrastructure in Illinois. And we kicked off. We were founded because one of our good friends was living fairly close to where Enbridge, the big Canadian oil company, or pipeline company rather, was planning on building a new oil, crude oil tar sands oil pipeline called Line 66. They already have one called Line 61 that goes from Superior down to Patoka, and they wanted a parallel one because they thought they were going to be in great need of more capacity. And we worked on that one for quite a long time. This is all pre-Zoom and pre-internet even, or pre-Google Earth, I should say. We had a great deal of difficulty identifying landowners along the line who wanted to alert to this thing. We actually had a volunteer, no, a paid person who would go door to door to the farmers because we couldn't find their names and so on and alert them. And after a while, we found out that, heck, this thing isn't going to happen. Line 3 and all the fantastic work the guys up in Minnesota did and in Wisconsin to slow down Line 3 were so successful that this pipeline was just not going to happen. So we bailed out of that one. And just in that time, Dakota Access, Energy Transfer, big pipeline, the one that had the trouble up in North Dakota, they announced they were going to double the size of that pipeline. And we felt that was something of a serious risk to people. And we actually fought them in the Illinois Commerce Commission. We were the only major intervener against that pipeline. It took us a lot of time. And in the end, we lost the battle. The Illinois Commerce Commission gave them permission to double. And we took that to court because we felt the arguments that they accepted were bad. The court there said, yeah, we agree with you on some of these things, including a very important one on how you could define need. And we get into that a little bit later on. Need is a big deal in this sort of business. And when they gave us that ruling, we took it back to the ICC and said, look, it's very clear the court doesn't agree with what you've done. And they said, screw the court, basically, if you'll pardon my French. And we took it back to the court. And the court said, well, who cares? And so we didn't get anything done that way. We did that good ruling. And we didn't have the money and the time to appeal it to the Supreme Court. So we backed out of that. And just as that was happening, the first of the carbon dioxide pipelines showed up, called the Navigator pipeline. It was going to go all the way from Nebraska, South Dakota, Minnesota, Iowa, down to Illinois, because we had this very favorable geology, I should say, for burying carbon dioxide. And so we jumped on that one, and we decided that it was impossible for us to do that by ourselves because most of our people are up in the northern suburbs of your area. And we were fortunate to hook up with the Illinois Clean Jobs Coalition, which is the one that gave us FEJA and CEJA. And they had created something called the Downstate Caucus because they didn't feel that they felt they needed something to counterbalance Chicago, who was making all the rules. The Downstate Caucus was a sort of center of the state organization. And they jumped on this thing with both feet. And we got a wonderful organizer who formed the Coalition to Stop CO₂ Pipelines, which is a group of something like 19 different environmental and faith organizations of varying degree of involvement, but anyhow, they all support us. And we started things like getting together, getting the names of all the landowners with the help of Google Earth, where we could easily go in and find all the people along the line or within a mile of the line and so on. And at a certain point, we decided we needed to intervene in the ICC. And so we formed the first of our 501c4 organizations specifically to go to the ICC and fight that battle. And we were very successful with the help of the ICC staff, which was spectacularly good. The pipeline company got halfway through the process and was about to get to the expensive part, and they threw their hands up and said, "We're never going to get this permit, so we'll back out, and we'll come back in a couple of months." Well, they came back much too fast, having not solved any of the problems, and got thrown out a second time. And then another pipeline company came, Wolf, who we thought would be a real threat because they actually run a carbon dioxide pipeline, unlike Navigator, who had never seen one. And they turned out to be even more inept than Navigator was, and they got thrown out too. And then the third one, One Earth, a small pipeline, only 5 miles long, we had to form we couldn't use our same technique of going out and asking for a certain percentage of the farmers on the line to give us 500 a year to fund this exercise. So we had to use a 501c3 to do that so we could get charitable contributions. And so our little soil group became the intervener for that one. And that one is now on hold because the coalition, with a lot of friends, was able to pass 2 major laws through the Illinois General Assembly. One which put a freeze on pipelines for 2 years, another one which put a freeze on drilling through the Mahomet Aquifer for 5 years. So everything is on hold pretty much at the moment, but that's only for a little bit longer. Has Kathy made it back yet?
Not yet, not
Oh, dear.
yet.
Okay, well, in the interest of time, we're going to keep going. This is what we want to cover, some of it very quickly. You know, we're not quite sure how many of you attended the previous presentation that Pam Richard did here. I'm sure some of you have, but just to level set, we'll go through a couple of housekeeping things like what is eminent domain and why landowners don't like it. Then we're getting into these other matters, so we'll be covering all that, various levels of detail as we go through. Okay, so I'll kick off on this one here. This is sort of the AI or dictionary definition of eminent domain. It's just basically the power of the government to enable to either themselves or through someone they delegated to go in and just take private property for usually obvious public needs. So like a new road, a railroad, a power line, or something like that. The public clearly, well, in some respects anyhow, benefits from it or suffers from it. But anyhow, if there's somebody who's got land that's necessary for this project and the owner doesn't want to sell it or sell the right to use it, then the government can come in if they have the right for eminent domain and just take it. They have to pay for it. It should be for public use, but sometimes it isn't, and that's one of our problems here. They have to pay what they call fair market value, which is what someone would pay to buy that land from the farmer. But sometimes when it's a pipeline or something like that, that's nowhere near enough to compensate the farmer for the loss. So just compensation is not very just in many cases. As I say, this authority is given usually to federal and state governments, but in the case of these CO₂ pipelines, it's given to the pipeline company that is in every case a private organization. So this is the power to take somebody's farmland or as Kathy will say, her back garden, and pay what's a relatively nominal amount for it, and just come in and put this dangerous pipeline into it. So, and that's for private profit. It's all basically financed by the federal government providing something called 45Q tax credits at the price of $80 a ton now for anything. So we don't like it. Farm owners don't like it. And the legal process for getting permission is quite tedious. And the legal process for fighting that permission is also tedious. Okay, so landowners dislike this a great deal because landowners like their land a great deal. There's a real amount of passion. If you've had a farm in your house, in your family for 100 years or something like that, you were very attached to it. And you've seen what's happened with other badly run pipelines like Dakota Access, where they came in and literally destroyed acres and acres of farmland, hundreds of acres, thousands of acres of farmland by the way they dug their trenches and they mixed up the dirty soil with the good soil and so on. So farmers hate this. And it actually literally can force them out of their houses. They may not get, the house might not be actually on the pipeline, but they might find it so dangerous or it's so disruptive to their farming process that they just have to sell out and go somewhere else. Forces them out of there for much less than market value. And there's a real resentment to people taking your farmland, primarily farmland, by force, by law, in order to make private profit. So they don't like it for that reason. And the market value that the way they calculate it often misses the point. So if you were, for example, a farmer and you felt there was a chance you could develop your farmland for a housing estate or something like that, and they stick a pipeline right in the middle of it, bye-bye housing estate. So, it takes a far lot more away from the farmers than it should do. Okay, Kathy was going to come in and talk about this one, but the problem, what got her involved, and she's been incredibly involved in this stuff for several years now, was that this is her house in Glenarm, the back garden anyhow, where she and her husband have spent years building this place and making it beautiful. And she got a notice one day from, well, someone came to a call, I think, and said, look, we're going to put a pipeline in your back garden, right down the end where those trees are. And if you don't cooperate, we're going to use eminent domain to get it. So sign up here so we don't have to use eminent domain. And she said, hell no, I'm not going to do it, and been fighting it ever since. So I'm fortunate she can't come in and tell you her story. It's much better than I can tell it, but it was something that got her really involved, and she joined the whole group, and we've been working on it forever. Okay, so why are people so more concerned about CO2 pipelines than they have been about oil pipelines or gas pipelines? It turns out that the risk of a CO2 pipeline is much greater to people, to far more people, than an oil pipeline or a gas pipeline would be. If an oil pipeline leaks, most of the time it's oil on the ground. You shovel the dirty oil away and replace it with fresh oil. No one dies. Occasionally it leaks it so badly they have to buy whole subdivisions and close them down, but that's rare. If a gas pipeline bursts, most of the time, unless it's right in the middle of your house or your housing estate or something like that, and it goes up in flames, then it can cause real damage. But by and large, they go up, the gas is lighter than air, it goes up in the air, doesn't usually catch fire. If it does, it dissipates and doesn't, again, very often cause death. But a CO2 pipeline operates 3 times the pressure of a oil pipeline or a gas pipeline.
We have Kathleen.
Oh, okay. I'll keep going, I think, on this one. This was my slide anyhow. The CO2 in a pipeline is compressed so high and that it becomes a liquid. It's much more efficient to pump a liquid around than a gas, and you use different tools to pump a liquid than you do pumping a gas, and it just makes it much more efficient. If you pump it and keep it hot, it becomes something even more dangerous called a supercritical liquid, but most of the pipelines are not supercritical. So the problem with that is that there's great pressure. If the gas is able to escape from the pipeline, it has to change from a gas, or from a liquid rather, to a gas. And in the process of doing so, it has to have the heat drawn from somewhere in order to enable that transfer phase from liquid to gas. So it becomes very cold in the process. Even if it was room temperature or worse in the pipeline, it becomes very cold as it escapes. And that makes the pipeline very brittle, and the pipeline literally unzips for a very long area because it gets cold and brittle, and the pressure forces it to break. And so the gas can come out in a very large quantity. very cold. It's already heavier than air. And so it just stays on the ground. It'll go up quickly and it'll sink down to the ground and it'll stay together as a plume and it'll move slowly with the wind. It doesn't dissipate. The pipeline companies will tell you it dissipates. It doesn't. And we've got proof of that with our modeling and so on. And so it can move and it can move a long way, several miles, and still be as dangerous as it was close to, or nearly as dangerous as it was when it's close to the rupture point. And it's odorless and tasteless. So imagine if you're a mile away from the pipeline, the thing blows up, you don't even know it's happening. The wind blows in your direction, you're asleep, and you're dead in the morning. It's that bad. And so you can be miles away from the pipeline, at least 2 miles away from the pipeline. And if it's a big one, it can kill you. And there have been very few of these accidents because there are very few miles of pipeline and of CO₂ pipeline. And most of the pipeline miles are in the middle of nowhere. I mean, they're in the Texas desert and so on. And if they blow up, nobody even knows that they've done it. They don't bother to report it half the time. And so it's very likely you could be near one of these explosions and not even know about it. Okay.
Rick, I'm
yeah.
back.
Okay. Well,
Yeah.
I did briefly introduce you, so why don't you go ahead and do it again so everyone knows how you got
Squatter,
into this
right.
business.
I apologize. I know that this group sometimes deals with rural connectivity, and let me say that I strongly support that issue because I have a computer and a backup computer. It took them both out, and I still don't know exactly what's going on. But anyway, I'm back for now. So I'm going to jump in here a little bit, and we'll go back and forth as Rick and I promised. So CO₂ pipelines are far more dangerous than gas and oil pipelines, even though the fossil fuel companies will try to tell you that they're just the same. They are certainly not. So CO₂ pipelines carry toxic, hazardous waste. They can rupture, exploding, exposing residents to asphyxiation and CO₂ toxicity within minutes. And that's one of the things we need to address. You will not have time to escape, and your car will not work because gas-powered cars simply won't work. And you won't even have time to get to your electric car usually. The CO₂ pipeline plume moves at the speed of the wind, spreading at a mile in 15 minutes or less. And we knew that from an accident in Satartia. And it can be life-threatening even further, far further, in fact, because it's a heavy gas that travels around the ground. According to PHMSA, the Pipeline Hazardous Materials and Safety Administration, a CO₂ pipeline accident occurs for every 1,000 miles of CO₂ pipelines approximately once per year. So when we talk about putting in thousands of miles, up to 94,000 miles of these, we can expect 94 accidents a year if they do that full build out. Neither the Illinois nor the federal regulations address safe CO₂ pipeline routing, and they cannot right now. So the pipelines are not routed safely, cannot be routed safely by any mandate. CO₂ pipelines don't carry any form of energy, and CO₂ pipelines and CCS in general are a very expensive and relatively ineffective climate solution. Next slide, please. So this is, again, continuing on why they're more dangerous. So if they rupture, they actually explode. They're not combustible, but they can explode with great violent force, exposing residents to CO₂ asphyxiation toxicity, again, within minutes. In the event of a CO₂ pipeline rupture, no occupied building should be exposed to 40,000 parts per million. That's a 4% concentration that the CDC says immediately dangerous to life or health. The companies will say, oh, CDC doesn't really mean immediately dangerous to life or health. Yes, it does. People can't self-evacuate. Your cars won't run unless they're all electric. And even if you can get to your car, you probably will be in no shape to drive. And again, within minutes. First responders can't reach people in time. So the best EMS plan in the world doesn't work if you're dead when they arrive. Upgraded PHMSA safety rules released in the final days of the Biden administration were proposed, but now the Trump administration will not let them be implemented. No setbacks are required in Illinois or elsewhere, and public opposition is very high, and for very good reason. Eminent domain was never meant to take away landowners' safety for private gain. Next slide, please. So let's see, Rick, do you come in on 12 then?
I think I may be doing that.
Oh, nope,
No,
I'm
not
still here.
1960.
Okay.
You're still there.
I'm still getting oriented here, folks. Sorry. CO₂ pipeline companies are routing CO₂ pipelines far too close to occupied buildings, and they're doing it routinely. And they're doing it with schools and churches and businesses. All three Illinois CO₂ pipeline applications to date routed pipelines so close to occupied buildings that a rupture could cause a 50% fatality rate in less than 15 minutes. EMS could not arrive in time, and only all electric cars would work. Cetartia, where they had a huge incident in 2020, was a mile away from the rupture, and yet here the pipelines are routed less than a couple of 100 feet from buildings. Cetartia, a mile away. Everyone was unconscious when they arrived, and some still have permanent health effects. They had seizures and passed out. PIMSA is prohibited from involvement in routing, yet state and local governments are being sued for considering safety and setbacks in routing. Companies request signed easements before residents know their risks. So when they wanted to go through my backyard and sent me a letter, they were threatening eminent domain from day one, but we had no information. We'll take questions at the end of the presentation. Yes, thank you. Companies withhold plume modeling. Plume modeling is what tells you how far this spreads and how fast it spreads and the density. But they withhold that until usually late in the proceeding, when the landowners like me ask the plume modeling results and the risks, they withhold it, or they say we don't know, or maybe we'll do it later, but they don't want to tell you your risk level. So the only answer is to ban eminent domain for CO₂ pipelines so landowners can prevent the pipeline from unsafe routing. So here's the deal. Right now, they can use eminent domain, and so they actually threaten landowners with that. They're unwilling to negotiate. And so we'll get into later how getting rid of eminent domain can create a fair deal for landowners and how
Thank
then
you.
to the position to negotiate.
So the probably the best way to do it would be to have a standard way of looking at the danger, standard way of estimating how far things would go based on the size of the pipeline and how long between the valves, and just saying don't put a pipeline so close that you can't get out of the way of this thing if it ruptures, um, and do it standard across the world. That's not possible to us at the present moment. So that's the reason why we say the only answer at the present moment is this use of eminent domain. There's good reason for eminent domain anyhow, but it's the only one we have that lets us try and protect ourselves and people from
Right.
this risk.
Because right now we can't even be forced from signing. So what's happening with eminent domain for CO₂ pipelines in other states? Everyone's starting to learn how dangerous these are. So South Dakota enacted a statute in 2025 prohibiting the use of eminent domain by CO₂ pipeline companies after multiple lawsuits by Summit and by Navigator there, trying to force people to have the CO₂ pipeline too close to occupied buildings. Now the landowners are countersuing because they thought they had eminent domain. They actually entered houses without permission. They sequestered people on their land and went with an armed guards to take samples from their land, etc. In Iowa, a bill prohibiting the use of eminent domain for CO₂ pipelines passed both houses in 2025, but was vetoed by Governor Reynolds. The bill will undoubtedly come up again because the landowners there are adamant that eminent domain is inappropriate for these private companies with a toxic hazardous waste. In
Governor
South
Reynolds took $270,000 from the guy who owns the pipeline or was proposing the pipeline, so she was not conflicted.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the governor there is deeply conflicted, and she says, "I'm not running again. I'm just going to veto it."
Yeah.
But she won't be there forever. In Minnesota, the use of eminent domain is not allowed. They don't allow it for any private projects. And so it's not allowed for CO₂ pipelines. So there in Minnesota, Summit seemed to take a very different tact because they didn't have eminent domain, and they were able to obtain voluntary easements on the 28-mile long pipeline, which was then approved by the state's Public Utilities Commission in December. And I'm trying to read the bottom. Okay. The inability to use eminent domain in Minnesota force project developers to negotiate. And that's what we want them to do. We want to force them to negotiate voluntary easements with landowners to address many of their concerns related to the project impacts.
Okay, this is mine.
Yep.
Yep. Okay. There is, you may have heard that there is a thing called the CCS Safety Act, which we passed with a lot of work from the Coalition to Stop CO₂ Pipelines through the Illinois General Assembly 2 years or year, no, 2 years ago, basically. No, a year ago, wasn't it? And that gave us a moratorium on pipelines for 2 years until PIMSA came up with final regulations for how the pipelines should be built, because they really have no effective regulations governing regular pipelines at this point. There are some regulations they put back in 2010 or something like that, which only cover that small fragment, which is supercritical CO₂, which is when it's above 80 degrees Fahrenheit. If you put pipeline in the ground, it doesn't, the gas, even if it's hot when it starts off, gets down to ground temperature pretty fast. So most of the pipeline is not supercritical, and therefore it's not covered by any of the current PIMSA regulations. And when we put this new bill in, it was supposed to say, stop doing any work until you know how to build these things. It's a reasonable thing to say. If you don't have good regulations on how to build it, and there aren't many miles of them anyhow, it's a good thing to wait till the engineers have thought this thing through and come up with good regulations. And they actually did that in January this year, too late. But one of the things that was in the bill that we passed was that for the destination where the CO₂ is going, the sequestration well, when you pump the CO₂ down the hole 7,000 feet into a area that's filled with brine and is very porous, it spreads out and it forms a plume underground. And the people above the plume have to give permission, do an easement basically, just to accept it under their ground. We say that the ground from where you are on the surface to the center of the earth belongs to the person at the top. So in order to use that, you have to get an easement. And in the bill we passed, we made the reasonable condition rather, that 75% of the people above that plume had to voluntarily agree to take the CO₂. Now it's a mile and a half down, so they'll probably never see it, but there is some risk it'll come up. And so they can only use eminent domain on 25% of the stuff that they need it for. So that is only for the sequestration area. And we tried to get that into the other bill, and it was not accepted by the governor. So there is no minimum amount of eminent domain, voluntary easement rather, that you have to have for a CO₂ pipeline. And we think that's very unreasonable, unequal, and we need to equalize that. Okay. One way of preventing these pipelines, or the only real way of preventing the pipelines, is to go in Illinois to the Illinois Commerce Commission, that's our Public Utility Commission, and intervene in the case, the docket. When a pipeline is to be built, a docket is opened, the pipeline company files an application to build the pipeline, and they're supposed to provide all the material that they need as justification for it at the time they apply. And then anybody who objects to it, who's got the wherewithal to object, can come in and object to the pipeline. Now, it's a very legalistic process. Everything is done in writing in very formal legal ways of doing it. The public in general, unless they intervene, can write anything they want to in the way of letters to the ICC or put them on their website, but those letters are normally totally ignored. They might be counted, and if there's an overwhelming preponderance of letters against the pipeline, they might note that. But they say that if you're not available to be cross-examined, you aren't part of the record. So the general public has no say in this process. If you do choose to intervene, Fortunately for pipelines, you only have an 11-year crusade to fight. 11-month crusade. Most ICC stuff is open-ended. Like my one I did with Dakota Access took 3 years. The pipeline stuff is relatively quick, which is both a blessing and a curse because you start off by doing what they call discovery, where you've got to go in there and ask them for things you need to prepare your case, and they have to give them what you want, and they can ask you what they need to know about why you're doing this and things like that. You need to have lawyers. It's virtually impossible to do it without high-paid lawyers. And so getting into this process, even for the relatively short time, bearing in mind Navigator never got to the end of the process, cost Kathy's organization 120,000 at least. And that includes things for expert witnesses and so on. You have to have a very professional team fighting this battle. And not many people can put together the organization and get enough people together to fight like that. And so that is a basic problem. Now, when Navigator did this, they spent several years trying to sign up landowners to agree voluntarily to accept the pipeline. And after all this time, they only got 164 out of 1,103 necessary easements on that land. So 14% of the land of the pipeline was covered by easements like that. And so it shows you what a struggle it is. But nonetheless, had the ICC determined that there was a need for this pipeline, they would automatically have got eminent domain to use on the remaining 86% of the landowners. Now, could they have done that? Probably not. The legalistic problem of fighting that many landowners would be a nightmare. But it just shows you the risk if they had been determined to have need, and in some parts of the bill, the pipelines bill is defined as being a necessary function, then they could have used eminent domain. Okay, so without the ability to rely on eminent domain, Navigator would have been forced to negotiate in good faith with landowners. A landowner could have said, I'm not going to let you put it down this part of my farm, but if you put it down the ditch along the side, that's okay. We can come to a way of doing it. If you were under eminent domain, they'd say, I don't care. I'm going to put it where I want it. The shortest line between 2 points is a straight line. I'm going to go straight through the middle of your field and cut it off, So the landowners have no negotiating power. The contracts, the easements are overwhelmingly in favor of the pipeline company, as you'd expect. Like most contracts, the person who writes the contract puts in what they want. They want them to be uniform across the land, so they don't want to have people negotiating what goes into even a voluntary easement. So it's the basic problem. Now, as we said earlier on, PIMSA is prohibited in the act that forms PIMSA from getting involved in the routing process. That's defined as being a function of the state. And as we said earlier on, the only safe way of having a pipeline or being near a pipeline is to be far enough away from it. So if it blows, you have time to get out reasonably before the plume gets to you. Now, the plume will only go in the direction of the wind, so it might have a rupture and go somewhere completely away. But if you're downwind from that pipeline, you have to get out before it gets to you. Not easy. The ICC has recognized that it has responsibility for routing, but because the oil pipelines that it's approved in the past really don't endanger life, it's never got involved with the routing. It says if the pipeline company has negotiated easements over there, let them build it. And now this is a completely different issue where you've got the risk to many people who are nowhere near the pipeline, 2 miles away, and don't even know it's there. Somebody ought to be looking out for their interests, and it isn't happening. No one really is in a position to mandate pipeline routing. The courts up in Eighth Circuit have said that local authorities shouldn't get involved in the routing process because they've misread the law. They said if it says safety on it, it belongs to PIMSA. PIMSA only deals with safety from the pipeline company's point of view. In other words, they give you the rules to try and keep the CO2 in the pipeline. That's where they stop. So if the CO2 ruptures, the pipeline is ruptured for any reason, that's not PIMSA's problem, but it sure is your problem if you live downwind from it. And nobody's looking out for you at the present moment, and we're trying to do that. Summit Pipeline has been filing lawsuit after lawsuit against counties and municipalities because they've tried to implement setbacks and put in rules like usage rules and so on. And so they are very litigious up there. We haven't had that problem down here because we managed to get rid of them so far. So the only way we believe that we can still get somebody with the power to provide safety routing is to get eminent domain taken away from the landowners so that they can say, don't put this pipeline close to my house, and move it so where it's away and it's in a safe distance there. Okay. Kathy, I think this is your...
Okay. So is the purpose of banning eminent domain really to ban CO2 pipelines entirely? No, the purpose is to protect landowner rights and property rights, farmland productivity, and to improve CO2 pipeline safety, particularly for routing. Next slide, please. So how would eminent domain protect property rights? So currently, no voluntary easement threshold exists, like we talked about. Again, 0%. That pipeline could still get approved even if nobody signs up for it. So even if no voluntary right-of-way easements are obtained by a company wanting to build a CO2 pipeline, the Illinois Commerce Commission can legally grant the eminent domain powers, and probably will if they issue that permit, then they have to give the eminent domain, even for 100% of the easements, even over the objections of the landowners. So eminent domain could prevent a landowner from future lucrative development of their land. Say I want to put in a housing subdivision next to my land. I have other plans for that land. We have one person that wants to put in a health spa next to the area of a CO2 pipeline, but she says nobody's going to come up here to relax next to the hazardous waste signs. So it could prevent their lucrative development of their land. It could also force them to move. And we do have farmers saying that they will move their house if the CO2 pipeline is forced through their land because they couldn't let their children live next to that risk. And that's unacceptable. And yet the pipeline company only wants to pay for the strip of land itself, not for them to move. So how would it create a fairer deal for landowners? Being able to use or threaten to use eminent domain to take, and they do threaten to take private land for pipeline right-of-way, gives CO2 pipeline companies an unfair advantage over Illinois landowners. That is not a fair negotiation. Prohibiting the use of eminent domain by CO2 pipeline companies would force them to negotiate with landowners on a level playing field. If they have to bargain with landowners over such matters as damage to topsoil, damage to drain tile, we had one area where they were cutting across a farmer's drain tile every 30 feet, another place every 60 feet. You can't repair that, but they wouldn't listen to the landowner because they wanted the shortest route. Damage to terraces, waterways, and erosion, land erosion and control structure, yield loss, safe setbacks from occupied buildings, and their location relative to livestock, large livestock facilities, and providing safety and CO2 detection equipment to landowners and nearby residents for use in case of pipeline ruptures. By the way, the One Earth pipeline, their solution was, since they were running so close to buildings, is they were going to give out oxygen en masse to everyone in the area. And then you were supposed to carry that with you all the time. So that was unacceptable to the landowners, of course. But additionally, prohibiting the use of eminent domain would force companies to pay landowners fair market value and perhaps consider their future opportunity costs for right-of-way land, and in the practice of companies offering landowners fixed lowball prices, which they do for pipeline easements. And many times if the landowners say, that's a lowball price, my land is worth much more, they say, fine, we'll just take it through eminent domain. And threatening to initiate condemnation proceedings, as they did when they first gave me my first letter. They threatened condemnation if I refused an easement, and that was my first contact and the first time I really heard about CO2 pipelines. So in previous pipeline applications, pipeline routes did not respect the location of drain tile. And again, pipeline trenches and and slopes, erodible land slopes as steep as 14%. And the farmer said, you can't put a pipeline there. The land will all erode away underneath it. But again, they didn't want to listen because it was the shortest and cheapest route. So they're unwilling to negotiate, and several research reports document multiple year losses in both corn and soybean yields over pipeline easements. Years later, if you fly over, you can still see the tracks of pipelines. Next slide, please. So have they threatened the use of eminent domain to prevent fair negotiations? Absolutely. Multiple reports and including my own experience here. Navigator's initial letter to landowners said, our goal is to reach voluntary easements. This is straight out of my letter along the project route, but if we're unable to do so, you may need to request the right of eminent domain condemnation from the ICC. Similar threats have been made by CO₂ pipeline companies to landowners in other states, and they start that way. And quite frankly, they also start with the elderly. And down here, they were also reading, we swear they're reading the obituaries because 2 days after somebody died, they went to the grieving spouse and tried to get an easement. I find
Elderly and widows are the prime target, first of all. Once you get them going, then you can say, your neighbor's done it, so why don't you?
And they told everybody that their neighbors had already signed on when they had not. They flat out lied. And they also went to a 92-year-old woman down here that lived alone and would not leave her alone. She had to call her daughter to come in and protect her. The ability to,
Sorry.
okay, that's fine. Okay, so have they tried to force unsafe routing? Yes, I think we've been covering that. But I want to go to the last one here. Again, they're routing it so that within 5 minutes, you're going to be hit with a level, and this is common, as it would have been in my backyard, with a 50% fatality rate within 10 minutes. So you only have 5 minutes. And then within 10 minutes, 50% are dead and 50% have toxicity, and that's disabling. And in one case, a CO₂ pipeline company representative told an Illinois landowner it would be cheaper for the company to pay a wrongful death judgment than to move the pipeline a safe distance from the houses. So this is how the eminent domain is abused right now. Next slide, please. So do we want to ban eminent domain for other purpose? Well, our campaign is strictly banning eminent domain for CO₂ pipelines which transport toxic, hazardous waste, not purposes other than CO₂ pipelines. And let's see, wind and solar, is that you or me, Rick? Doesn't matter. So wind and solar, which are out there and are growing all the time, don't have eminent domain. So they go in and they negotiate with the landowners, and there's no eminent domain, and yet, according to the Environmental Research and Education Center, Illinois now generates 4,790% more solar power and 119% more wind power than it did in 2014, all without the use of eminent domain. And stored CO₂ is a hazardous toxic waste product, and it does have eminent domain. So I think the next one is yours, Rick.
Yeah, and the difference in the kind of contracts that you have for wind and solar and those for oil and gas is enormous. For example, wind and solar, you get a continuous payment every year if you've got that on your land. Whereas in oil and a CO₂ and an oil pipeline, you get a one-time payment. No matter how much money the pipeline company makes off your land or how long that pipeline is going, you won't get another cent out of them, unless a little bit for loss of productivity. But that's about the only hope you're ever getting any more. And they can come at any time and dig the thing up again if it's they think it's got a leak, or they can tear your fences down and things like that. So it's very unequal because we don't have eminent domain. Okay, so if we could eliminate eminent domain, would that help with the safety? And we think it would enable the landowners to force the CO₂ pipeline away from their homes. And if it has to force it to near somebody else's home, then they would have to come in and again fight eminent domain. But it would force the companies to consider safe routing in ways they just don't at the present moment when they've got the power of eminent domain.
And it's crazy. For solar and wind, there's mandatory setbacks. but not for
Yes.
CO2 pipelines, which are far, far more dangerous.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, you can't. You've got to have a good gap, even for a solar farm, which is completely silent and no activity. Just on the aesthetics alone, you can put a trees in between and keep it away. Whereas these dangerous pipelines, no setbacks, no differences. One of the um, potentially most beneficial ways of reducing greenhouse gases is to deal with the aviation problem. It's a really, really hard problem to solve. You're not going to fly across the Atlantic on a battery, not for not my lifetime anyhow. Synthetic aviation fuel made from either ethanol or CO2 is a potential way of doing it. Now, it still makes CO2 when you burn it in the plane, not as much as if you're burning it from fossil fuels, but you, in theory, you've sucked all that CO2 out of the air previously to make the corn from which you get the ethanol, grow the CO2. So synthetic aviation fuel is one of the um, things which we sort of reluctantly have to say is necessary. And you can make it from either ethanol or from CO2, though neither of these are commercially available at the moment. There are places that are doing it. The airlines are desperate to get it because they're all under pressures to reduce their carbon footprints, and this is the only way they can do it. They're prepared to pay for maybe 10% of the jet fuel they use to pay twice as much for it or three times as much for it, which is what it takes at the moment. But they really aren't prepared to roll it out and in scale 100% at those prices. So it's not commercially viable yet, but it's getting better. And as the scale goes up, it'll be better. They say there are two ways to do it. You can take the ethanol, and in a relatively simple process, you can make CO2 out of it. But if you do that, you're still making, sorry, make SAF. But if you do that, you're still generating the CO2 that made the ethanol. Therefore, you still need the pipelines. On the other hand, if you take the greener view of it, you take the CO2 itself and you combine that with hydrogen, and you can make the methanol from which you can then make jet fuel. The problem with that is that right now, in order to make that hydrogen green, you've got to take water, which is getting increasingly scarce, electrolyze it with electricity coming from a solar or wind farm. And again, the price of that hydrogen is pretty high, which makes the price of the aviation fuel high. So it's to say it's not yet viable commercially, but it is being done. But if you could do that, that would avoid the need to have a pipeline. You probably put the SAF plant right adjacent to your ethanol plant. You've already got a rail line coming into the ethanol plant right now to take the ethanol away. It could just as easily take the synthetic aviation fuel to O'Hare or something like that. So it is definitely one of the selling points that SAF made from CO2 does not require carbon capture and sequestration. Another possible use of this is green methanol. Methanol is a candidate for being used for a replacement for the very, very dirty oil, bunker oil, which is what's used still by a lot of the shipping, heavy shipping, long distance shipping. It's being tried to be cleaned up, but the US has just taken the pressure off the shipping companies by allowing them to continue to use dirty fuels. But a lot of them, particularly the European-based ones, Maersk and so on, they are under obligation from Europe to get green somehow. So the opportunities are either hydrogen or methanol seem to be the major alternatives for that. And green methanol is in considerable demand. It's also a very good raw material to make all sorts of other things from. And you can, again, make that from the CO2 with suitable catalysts and so on. It would be done on site and it would avoid the need for a CO2 pipeline. So we would like that to happen, even though, again, it's still, when you burn it, it still does create CO2, but at least you're taking it out of the air first of all. Another argument that people will make for building these pipelines is that, well, look, they create jobs. And it's true that during the construction process, a relatively large number of jobs are created for a relatively short period of time. Unfortunately, most of those jobs are relatively skilled, and the people who have the skills come from Texas and Oklahoma, so it creates very, very few local jobs. We've tried to get them to commit to using some women-only owned businesses and some local contractors and so on, but it's really hard to enforce that. And the other argument you have is that if a good project is approved, it will automatically bring jobs. But you don't want to have people approving bad projects just to get jobs. And that's what's happening a lot. You'll find when you go into these ICC hearings that the unions are all alongside. And we're not against unions, but they are arguing that jobs of any sort make it worthwhile to allow the pipeline. And we're saying, no, you've got to make sure the pipeline is good. Then the jobs will come, not the other way around. Few permanent jobs, a lot of guest workers who have got a terrible reputation for coming into man camps and being very, very aggressive and hustling the local girls, and particularly up in where there's a lot of Indian tribes, they've got a terrible reputation for not only just hustling but killing them as well. Loss of economic opportunity because of poor and unsafe routing, loss of farm. We've already gone through all those things. Formal analysis show that the companies claim they will create far more jobs than they ever do. And when the pipeline is in, you're probably running it from somewhere like Oklahoma by remote control, as there's no local people beyond maybe a couple of local people for maintenance occasionally. Kathy, I think this is back to you, isn't it?
It is, Rick, but I'm looking and, I apologize much for losing my computer connection there for a while, but it is rural out here. But we're sitting at 8 o'clock and I'm looking at the chat and there's so many questions. We've talked a lot about safety. And I'd be happy to take more safety questions. Certainly, they're rooting it so close to Rankin Elementary School up in Tazewell. That elementary school, an elementary school full of children, they were less than 1,000 feet away. And again, they would have been in the 50% fatality, 100% toxicity zone. We have a refuge ranch down here for handicapped children. Sometimes they have 100, 200 children at a time out there for events. They were less than 200 feet away. That would have been really sudden death with no escape. Churches, businesses. So we've gone into that, but we have a lot of questions. And so why don't we take some questions? If we have some time left, I'd be happy to go back. We have a lot of slides on economics and routing. But would the preference of the audience be that we take some questions now?
I think so.
Okay.
Yes.
It sounds like it. I see all the good questions over here and room for discussion. I don't want people to not feel heard and not get their questions answered.
Okay, Kathleen, would you like me to read the questions to you?
Sure.
Okay,
Rick gets the hard questions. I get the easy questions.
You guys will have to decide on that one.
Yeah, we'll
Okay.
fight for them.
All right. First question is from Mark. Are you partnering with CUB, IEC, and ELPC?
We are not at the moment.
No.
We are okay, so and Rick and I have worked together. Rick was actually my mentor when this went through my backyard. Again, I'm a medical school professor, retired. I worked in pharmacology, health, chemistry, etc. But I didn't know much about pipelines themselves. I grew up in a plumbing company, but not pipelines like this. And so Rick was really my mentor and tutor on all of that. And so when I got the letter, I called Sierra Club and immediately started working with them, sending out letters to our landowners out here. They were trying to intimidate me. That didn't go well. And so we started a landowners group. Long story short, we have the Coalition to Stop CO₂ Pipelines, which has 14 member groups. Rick has worked with soil for many years. He has a much longer background in working on the environmental and pipeline issues than I do, certainly. But the group that I'm heading up, and again, we're all part of the Coalition to Stop CO₂ Pipelines now, is a landowner group. So we have some non-landowners in it, but it's mostly landowners. If you want to see the right and the left across the aisle working together, our group does great. We like each other. We work well together. We've got all different political opinions in there, and we just don't go there. We focus on pipelines.
Now,
But
we do, there are other organizations, we do national organizations like Food
right.
and Water Watch.
Oh, yes.
We spend a great deal of time with them and Sierra Club.
Yep.
In some states, Sierra Club is the group that's actually running the show. So like Iowa, Jessica in Iowa is the equivalent of our Pam Richard. She is really running the show. In Illinois, the Sierra Club has local groups, and several of the local groups where the pipelines are found are very big, and we do get support from them, from Ann Baskerville, who is a staff member. Excuse me a second. I'll deal with him later. So yeah, we do tie up with the people. It's very much a local business, and so the people who are close to us are ones more. The ELPC does some great work. Some of the other ones do too, but the ones we found most effective for this one are Sierra Club and are the big ones anyhow. Sierra Club and Food and Water Watch.
Now, keep in mind, we've been working across states. And so for South Dakota, I was feeding them a lot of safety information for their setbacks and routing, because again, that was the area I was very comfortable working in. They help back Sierra Club as well in Iowa. So we're in touch, and sometimes we have calls across the states. I'm talking to Minnesota, but so we keep in touch with each other and we coordinate and work with a variety of groups. But it's amazing how the connections are and how enthusiastic people are about for this. It's really not a good climate solution.
Okay. Well, Mark has a couple more questions here, I see.
Sure.
He is asking, and I think you might have partially answered this one. Iowa landowners have been fighting these with some success. Are we partnering with them and other states' orgs?
Yeah, we communicate with them a lot, and we support back and forth and help with each other's campaigns and talk to each other, and we're sharing a lot of information. But so again, if they need something, we call them, they call us, and we give a lot of support across the state boundaries. And there was a group that was meeting, I'm not sure it's meeting right now, of state landowners from all the different states. And I was with it for a little bit, but I just kind of ran out of gas as I as I focused on our own group here.
But bear in mind that the first two big pipelines, the Navigator pipeline and the Wolf
Yes.
pipeline, both came from Iowa, and we killed them. And
Yeah.
so they are very grateful for that. So
Yes.
that was a major breakthrough. Their one they're dealing with now is Summit. And Summit is a huge pipeline. It's like 2,000 miles now. They've picked up all of the ethanol plants that were originally going to come down to Chicago, plus a bunch more. They're trying desperately to get up to North Dakota, but South Dakota, because they've banned eminent domain, is preventing the pipeline from going up to North Dakota. And they're getting desperate about that because it's taking them an awful lot longer to get any progress. But we do work together, and we have an awful lot of sharing of things, and we're working together on the national things like PIMSA regulations and PIMSA reauthorization, are things we all work together on, particularly with Jim Walsh, who's the legislative manager or whatever else for Food and Water Watch, is our eyes and ears in Washington on doing this stuff. So we take advantage of who we can get.
And keep in mind, Illinois is a special target because they want us for sequestration. And we've got 12 to 14 wells under review right now. The Muhammad bill is blocking some of them, but Christian County down here by us, I live down by Springfield area, but that would be the largest in this state, and that permit is coming up for review, and I find it terrifying. If that gets approved, then all these pipelines are going to want to come through. But for Navigator, the sequestration area was here, and we beat up Navigator pretty good and are proud of it. So, but keep in mind, for Minnesota, same company, Summit, Minnesota, they've been treating people I'm not saying they're treating people well. They still try to get the widowers and the elderly, but they don't pull some of the same tactics. from all evidence that we have in Minnesota, where they don't have eminent domain, than they did in South Dakota. So now they're trying to go back to South Dakota, and they're calling that their charm offensive. But after the lawsuits that they filed up there and the way they've treated people, the South Dakota landowners just aren't having it. But now they have the power to turn them down.
Okay, the second part in this group, are the federal regs, e.g. catalog of federal regulations that supply here, are there federal regs for this?
Rick, why don't you go down to our slide,
Okay.
federal regulations?
Sorry, federal regulations. Which one was that?
Okay, let me find that for you.
50.
Okay, so if you go to slide 48,
That's just the title slide. There's 40. There
that's
you go.
yeah, so that's the title slide, and then 49.
That's this one
Oh, that's
here.
reform. But if you go to 50, then that's all the PIMSA changes that we need at the federal level.
Yeah, PIMSA was asleep at the switch, basically. They said there's only 5,000 miles of these pipelines, so we don't need to worry about them very much. And they thought it was innocuous, and it was until this explosion occurred in Cetacea. And then they came in, and as PIMSA doesn't do a whole lot while the pipeline's being built. They make the regulations, the companies agree to follow the regulations, and as long as everything seems to be okay, PIMSA stays away by and large. They've got a very small number of inspectors for hundreds of thousands of miles of all kinds of pipelines. But when something goes wrong, they send in the team and they tear the thing apart and they work out where things went wrong in a very, very thorough manner. And they did that for Cetacea. And they came to the conclusion, boy, we really do need regulations. This shouldn't have happened. You know, if we'd written basic regulations, this wouldn't have happened. And it's going to happen again if we don't write the regulations. So they set to work and took 2 years to write the good regulations. And they had a lot of public hearings, and they had like a 2-day solid hearing out in Des Moines, and they really listened. And we sat through that one for 2 days and gave them a lot of information. And the stuff they came back with wasn't perfect, never is, but it was pretty darn good. And if they only got it done 2 weeks earlier, we wouldn't have this problem. But they got it in there just before Trump came in, and so Trump threw it out. Yeah. And the strange thing about this, in a way, is that the industry wants regulations. They don't like being without regulations because it becomes their responsibility if things go wrong. If the regulations are there and say, we followed the regulations, what more do you expect? They're off the hook, you know? So they're actually telling the Trump administration, we need regulations. But, you know, whether they'll be as good as the ones that they came up with the first time is another matter. So there's a lot of things that need to be done. PIMSA does walk this thin line about how do they do this without changing the law that says they can't do routing. There are things they can do. For example, they recognize that some parts of the pipeline are more dangerous than others, and they have what they call high consequence areas. And so they say if it's so close to a certain number of people, it becomes a high consequence area. Therefore, you will put in pipe that's twice as thick and you'll bury it deeper, and you'll put in valves that are only 7 miles apart. Now, are those enough to save you? We don't think so. Our evidence is that even a 7.5 miles of 24-inch pipeline can still create a cloud that'll go 2 miles. Just a brief word on modeling. Modeling in these things is really critical, not just for the planning of the pipeline, but for the emergency responders who do, if they have to go in there, they need to know where the CO₂ is likely to be and so on. There's 2 kinds of modeling. One is quick and dirty, and it was never designed for CO₂ pipelines where you've got to change a phase from liquid to gas. It was designed for things, all gas to begin with or all oil to begin with and things like that. And so the pipeline companies love these things because they're cheap to run and they give nice low results. They say, by and large, we've been told, 1,000 feet away from the pipeline, you're golden. And we've been doing advanced modeling It's difficult to do. I spent a considerable amount of time going around the world trying to find someone who would do this kind of modeling who didn't work for an oil company, because that's the big buyer normally. And we were lucky enough to find a guy in Minnesota who was one of the best modelers in the world, who was not working for an oil company. And he's been doing work for us as well. And the first results of his modeling were published just a couple of weeks ago now, examining the risks of a school down in Louisiana. It was half a mile away from the pipeline and about a mile and a half away from the plant where the ethanol was being produced. And he has some great graphics that show basically that the school was near a subdivision, and both the subdivision and the school will be subject to more than 40,000 parts per million for more than 20 minutes. And so 50% mortality. And so that's become that kind of modeling is becoming very important, and we're just starting to do it. It's been slow.
So Richard and Kathleen, this is Mark. Just a clarification of my question. I took my 40-hour OSHA hazardous materials training,
Good
and
for you.
you get to look at the Code of Catalog of Federal Regulations on hazardous materials, but it doesn't sound like this applies because this is lumped under PIMSA, and they have control of this, but not FEMA or OSHA. Would
That's
you
right.
clarify?
There is a move to try and put the approval of pipelines for CO₂ into FEMA. It's basically the industry saying, God, it's being a hard trouble to get approval of these things. Let's take it out of the hands of the local guys and the people who know what's really going on and move it to FEMA, because they rubber stamp everything. They've got 99% approval rating of all natural gas pipelines in FEMA. Not FEMA, sorry, FERC. FERC is the one, not FEMA, FERC. And so we're opposed to that. The reason that PIMSA has it, they have responsibility for all hazardous liquid pipelines, and they did recognize CO₂ as hazardous, but they're the ones who can do most of this work. But we still need to have the right to do the routing outside of the PIMSA process. And if the ICC would do it, that would maybe not be too bad. Even if we have the local authorities doing it, the townships and the counties, they can put in some regulations which will make the pipelines a great deal safer than they are the way the pipeline companies are planning it now. It's a minimum cost exercise right now. And with eminent domain and a minimum cost, you've got two evils working together to reinforce one another.
Yeah.
Okay, we have a question from Jim, and it's asking, are these pipelines above or below ground? Is one implementation safer than another? This seems like something that a program like 60 Minutes should be showing.
It is. We have in fact been approaching 60 minutes. There are short ones, like the one in Decatur is like a 6-inch pipeline, and it runs for a mile above ground, I think, and then has a sequestration well really close there. By and large, the ones we're talking about that are 24-inch in diameter or something like that most of the time, those have to be buried. Otherwise, they'd be a major obstruction everywhere. And they typically go 5 feet underground. The problem is they don't necessarily stay 5 feet underground. Pipelines anyhow tend to rise up because of the densities involved and so on. They're lighter than rock, lighter than earth. And also, water washes away the topsoil, and sometimes you find these things are only 2 feet underground. And a big agricultural implement can very easily dig down 2 feet underground and fracture the pipeline and kill the operator of the tractor, whatever it is. So they are underground. Sometimes they'll say 6 feet underground. Whether it's 5 feet or 6 feet doesn't make a lot of difference. There really are no restrictions on how close an oil pipeline can get to a house. All the regulations on routing for oil pipelines say that if it gets closer than 50 feet, you've got to put another foot of dirt on top of it. That's the sum total of the safety for those things. And rules like that don't apply to CO₂ pipelines.
Right.
Okay, Garrick's question is, I've only heard about CO2 capture in the last few months and don't understand it. So, how is all this CO2 created? What is the source? Can you explain how it is captured initially? A quick overview, if you could.
Okay. Okay. CO2 has become a major subject because of government regulations. First of all, there was a regulation back in 2004 or thereabouts called the renewable fuel portfolio, renewable fuel mandate. Um, and that said basically that every gallon of gasoline had to have 10% of ethanol put into it. And the argument back in those days was, first of all, it'll clean up the exhaust from the car, which was particularly dirty in those days. Never mind, the cars have improved a great deal since then. Secondly, um, it will reduce our import of foreign oil. Back in the 2000s early, we were bringing an awful lot of oil in from Saudi Arabia and other places like that because we hadn't invented fracking yet. And the third thing is it'll be a boon for the farmers. Well, it turned out it didn't help the exhaust very much. We have other ways of doing it, and it turned instead of making sulfur oxides, which you could do with um, catalytic converters, it turned nitrogen oxides, which are worse, considerably 500 times worse than CO2 volume for volume. But didn't have a good climate impact. Just as soon as the regulations were in place on the renewable fuel standard, we invented fracking. And all of a sudden, we become the world's largest producer of oil. And we only choose to bring in oil, foreign oil now, because it's cheaper sometimes. Like the Canadian tar sands oil have got a lot of other things in them which you can make profits on, and you buy it for a lot less than you buy from Saudi Arabia than for domestic oil. And you buy it on the east coast because there are no pipelines that go to the east coast. Therefore, you bring it in from. So we choose foreign oil by convenience. So the argument for doing ethanol is not very good, but don't tell the farmers that because they've devoted their lives and their machinery on building it. So ethanol is one source. It turns out to be a very clean and easy source to deal with, relatively speaking. It's made just like you make beer. When you make beer, you get fermentation of carbon dioxide, and it's nearly 100% pure. It's just wet. All you have to do is to dry it, then you can compress it and move it away. There are many, many sources of CO2 besides ethanol. Ethanol is a relatively minor source compared to power stations. The worst being coal-fired power stations, where you get the CO2 in conjunction with sulfur dioxide, hydrogen sulfide, particulate matter, 25 particulate matter, and other things as well. And the process of extracting the CO2 from the flue gases is really difficult. You use an amine compound which can combine with the CO2 in a liquid form. You pump it through the amines, it combines with the CO2. Then you take the amine somewhere else and heat it up, and it boils off the CO2, and you can reuse the amine several times. And the problem with that is it can use up to 20 or 30% or more of the power of a power station just to run the capture process. So in order to get the same amount of electricity out the end, you've got to turn the power station up 40%. And when you do that, not only do you get 40% more CO2 to begin with, but you also get 40% more sulfur oxides and so on. And those things are not captured. So those go up into the atmosphere still and pollute the atmosphere, and it all create acid rain and things like that, or they need to be scrubbed out. So another big source is cement plants. Cement plants are particularly difficult because not only do you use natural gas usually to heat up the limestone to turn it into cement, but that process, which creates CO2, also the limestone throws off CO2 as well. So it's a output of the product the same way it is with the oil, with the ethanol rather, but it's now dirty because you've got the rock and so on and dust involved with it. So capturing from cement plant is a real problem, and there aren't any really good solutions in volume for making cement any other way at the moment. It can be done, but not really in production. The other one is steel. Steel plants also produce a whole lot of CO₂, and those are very hard to get. Another one is fertilizer plants. That's not so hard. You're making ammonia by and large to make nitrates, and you can get the CO₂ out of that process, which you make hydrogen. But you're using fossil fuel to make the hydrogen for most of those plants, and the fossil fuel burns off the CO₂. So there are lots of places that create CO₂. Because the hardest ones are cars. You can't do much to catch it out of a car unless you stop using fossil fuels. So you've got to get to electric cars to avoid that. Because that's 20% of the CO₂ up there approximately is coming from transportation. So we really need to get rid of those fossil fuel cars. But there's lots of ways lots of places it can come from. Getting it, how hard it is to get it separated to the purity you need to pump it as a liquid varies a great deal and costs a lot of money, and a lot of fossil fuel energy goes into that. And so that's why we're picking on ethanol as the first one. It's the low-hanging fruit. You can
Another
get ethanol plants and pull it.
another big risk we've got coming in is data centers.
Oh, God,
And
yeah.
they're starting to be correlating those with CCS because they take so much power that they don't want to take the time to put in renewables. Of course, renewables is you don't want to produce it in the first place. That's the best solution. But the data centers are going to take so much power that they're expecting is that they're going to be putting a lot of liquid natural gas with CCS, and then we're going to have even more pipelines. Very, very polluting. And of course, as Rick mentioned, the hydrogen formation, they say, oh, you burn hydrogen, it doesn't create CO₂. Yeah, but the process, if they're using blue hydrogen formation, you've got a real problem because, of course, that you still have a lot of CO₂. And Illinois is such a target because they think we're a great sequestration area.
Yeah. Yeah, the generators outside these data centers, some of them are running 24 hours a day. They can either be using diesel or they can run off natural gas. And now it's not like a regular power station. By and large, you get like a 12-cylinder V12 engine that's converted from diesel to run natural gas with a generator behind it. And those things still crank out a lot of CO₂. And by and large, there's no attempt to capture that CO₂. It just goes up into the atmosphere. They make an awful lot of noise in the process. Very unpleasant to be next to them. But that's the fastest way of getting more electricity, that you can get those big engines relatively quickly compared to the cost of building a power station. A big megawatts, gigawatt power station takes you 12 years to build or something like that. If it's nuclear, it takes 20 years to build. That's why they're going out and trying to find old nuclear power stations and converting and bringing them back to life again, so they can get a gigawatt of power fairly quickly. It's a nasty process. And of course, they use an awful lot of water in the cooling process. In most of these ones they've done so far, you can use either closed circuit cooling for the chips, where you put the chips in a rack and you seal the rack and you blow air through that and don't need a whole lot of water. You just refrigerate. You can reuse the water. But other ones, they just boil off the water. Then you're using thousands of gallons a day, hundreds of thousands of gallons a day. And we're just desperately short of water in a lot of these places. And they're taking water from aquifers, which are already drying out. The level in the aquifers going down and down and down and not being replenished. If the aquifers were replenished with water over 1,000 years, and we just are taking it out so fast, and
And
the data centers are making it worse.
And the closed loop systems, they say, oh, they're using water. Well, actually, they're also using coolants, and they're using a lot of anti-corrosive chemicals. And so that water, of course, is permanently ruined, and they have to clean it out. It can get mold in it. And then is it going to be disposed of properly? And if so, where? There's a lot of problems.
So I see we're getting to about 8:30. But let me just throw this out to, would you two like to put on a presentation on data centers in January? I've tentatively got open lands to speak, but I think data centers need to be addressed. And I think Bill maybe is going to say some things here, but is there legislation coming up? What can we do?
I think that now Rick knows much about everything. There's some groups that are anti-data center, and I
Yes.
know Prairie Rivers Network is also really working on data center opposition. We're going to have an event in Springfield at our convention center specifically about this large data center going at Talkington. And so I've been reaching out to find data center speakers because I know some about data centers, but really I'm not an expert in that area. So I've been
Yeah.
reaching out. I've been talking to Meg up in Minnesota. She's tied into a network. I could give you some contacts for data centers. Rick, maybe you could take it. You know a lot about data centers.
I don't know enough about it to do it.
But I don't do enough to do a
we-
seminar, but Prairie Rivers Network might, so Mark, offline, I could start putting you in touch with some other people.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you, I'll attend that seminar because I'm very interested.
Well, and I know Pam Pritchard at Equijustice Alliance
Yes.
she's
Yes, she may know
looking at
somebody
this
too.
so we got to do something. So,
Yep.
what do we want to do here? Do we want to take more questions? Bill, we got some more time. What are we going to do?
I think we have about 5 more questions.
Let's do it.
Let's see if we can get through 5 quickly. Let's extend this if everybody's open for that for another 10 minutes.
Okay, we will see.
And
Mark has another question here. Who are the CO₂ companies and who are their backers?
The pipeline companies and the sequestration people. Well, there are a lot of them. I mean, each one of these projects seems to have somebody else coming in as a financier for it, and some engineering. But the big ones we've run into, the biggest one has been the summit up in Minnesota, financed by I think it's got Chinese money in it, hasn't it, Kathy? It's got foreign money of certain kinds in it.
okay, Summit has been very tight-lipped about their funding sources. We know a few, but not all. And so I don't want to speak. Navigator came in and we knew they were running out of money when they brought in the United Arab Emirates to supplement their funding. And they didn't want to release that here to the ICC. We found out about it through their mandated reporting in Iowa. The Wolf Pipeline was 100% funded by the Canadian Pension Fund.
Yeah.
So that was all Canadian money. And then they withdrew. So what they do is they come in and they're coming in with foreign money. So it's not just that they're private companies and not public companies, so eminent domain is frequently used for public companies, but these are private companies. But then they frequently come in with foreign money as well. Again, Wolf was 100% Canadian pension fund money. Now, I lived in Canada 6 years worked for public health up there and loved it. I love Canada, but that's still a foreign government that has other priorities running a toxic hazardous waste pipeline down here. And I just don't think it's appropriate to give basically a foreign country. So they go a country eminent domain over US citizens. I just don't think it's appropriate. But what they do is they go out to the East Coast and they incorporate, so they're, quote, an American company, but they're totally funded under Canada and their mother company was in Alberta.
Yeah.
So
Delaware
into all these
corporation without any
complicated
regulations. Yeah. And could we put a pipeline into Mar-a-Lago?
No, that would be toxic waste coming out of that one.
Both ways.
Both ways, yeah. Okay, Garrick has another question. How will underground CO₂ storage affect our water tables?
Okay, well, in theory, it won't. That's the hope that everybody says it'll stay down there. It's 7,000 feet down typically. Sometimes it's 5,000, but it's a good long way down, a mile or so down, and the water table usually is within 200 feet of the surface. The concern we have is that we don't really know when we put it down there, the CO2 down there, it has to stay there for 1,000 years to be any real benefit for the climate. We don't want it coming back up again in 100 years. We're trying to, make ourselves. It's going to be hard enough once we get down to net zero. We're still at 4% CO2 in the air, or something like 4,000 parts per million. We've got to get rid of it. So we're still going to be taking it away for a long time to get back to a decent climate. And we don't want this stuff going down the well at great expense and being paid for by the taxpayers and then coming back up again, being put down again and again and charged each time. So um, we don't know the technology that will last 1,000 years. When they built the pipelines in Decatur, which is the only operating CO2 pipeline other than for enhanced oil recovery, which we didn't really hit on. But anyhow, they chose what they thought was the best available technology for this research project they put in. Um, when did they do this? 2017, I guess, was it before? But anyhow, they use what they call 13 chromium steel,
Mhm.
which is recognized as being highly resistant to corrosion. And they thought it would last, well, minimum 100 years at least. And within 7 years, this toxic mix of brine, salt water, strong salt water, and CO2 forming carbonic acid
Mhm.
had dissolved the steel in two different pipelines and caused leaks. So when you put this stuff down, you're getting down to what they call the Mount Simon layer. That's where this very permeable rock is with brine in it. Above that, there is the Eau Claire layer, which is supposed to be 500 foot thick of shale that is impervious to CO2. So in theory, it won't get above the shale level, but there's all sorts of things that happen that we don't know about down there. Cracks can exist inside this shale layer. You can create the process of forcing this gas down there can create local earthquakes, which will crack the rock. You can have a leak between where the pipe goes through the shale layer down below it, where it comes up around the pipeline and gets above it. And since the CO2 and the carbonic acid, when it's in water, is lighter than the soil, it will tend to migrate up. And it's another strong solvent. And so it will dissolve on the way up. Iron, lead, chromium, arsenic, you name it. A toxic brew of things dissolved in this, and it'll work its way up into the aquifer if there is one. And if it gets in the aquifer, like the Mohammed aquifer, it's the sole source of drinking water and irrigation and food and water for livestock for 800,000 people and all their animals and so on. And there is no alternative. If that gets polluted, they're SOL. And it's been declared to be a sole source aquifer by the EPA because it's such a high risk thing, which is why we put in this law we passed this year to say no drilling through the aquifer for at least 5 years while we research this process and make sure it can be done safely. And so there is a risk. It's not, I wouldn't say it's a high risk, but it's too high a risk to take to allow this CO2 to be put in a place where it could potentially destroy your underground water supplies.
Keep down, down here, we're in both the Wabash and the New Madrid seismic zones. They actually overlap. We do get seismic activity already up at ADM. It has increased their seismic activity.
Yeah.
And in ADM, it's already above the cap rock there
Yeah,
after their leaks.
it leaked. The other thing you should bear in mind is that I gotta say, oh, I'm sorry, I've gone. I'll get back to me in a second.
That's quite all right.
It was so important.
Okay, would you like me to ask the next question?
Sure.
Okay. Julie's question is, have you heard of using art as protection against eminent domain? And the reference is artist activist Aviva Rahmani.
I
I
don't know
have not.
Aviva. No, we haven't tried that here, but we do work with the people in Madison, Wisconsin, where they have a fantastic group that does art that's come down where they do a lot of painted fishes and things on sticks, and they do costume and street art and street acting and so on. And they've come down to Chicago to fight eminent domain and pipelines and so on. It's getting down to Champaign's a long way away from that's where most of the Champaign and Springfield is where a lot of the activity goes on there. We haven't had them down there for it'd be great if we could do. They do
Okay.
fantastic work.
Yeah. Two more questions at this point. Is your slide deck available? Julie would like to know.
Sure,
Sure.
I think so.
Okay.
Yep. We'll make it available.
And then Carolyn's question is, how many people live too close to the 5 miles of pipeline? Or should I say the 5,000 miles?
okay.
of
5,000
pipeline?
miles of pipeline.
Okay. They
Very
have,
few.
yeah. Okay, so here's the deal. The companies come in and they say, oh, we have this great track record. Yes, we have accidents, and we strongly believe that there's a lot of accidents not reported. But no, nobody's ever died from a CO₂ pipeline rupture. Well, in Satartia, again, they were hospitalized, they were over a mile away, et cetera. But those are in remote areas. In fact, for I've given testimony in all 3 ICC documents on safety. And when they say prove that, the pipelines were in more remote areas. So we took a population map of the United States and overlaid it over the pipelines that currently exist. Well, they're in very remote areas for almost, not quite all of them, but almost all of them. But now they want to go through populated areas. And that's the difference. You can't, they're comparing apples to oranges. They've got it out where it's very remote. We know that ruptures out there occur. But if it's a remote area, unpopulated by humans, you feel sorry for the animals that are out there, wildlife. But it doesn't meet the criteria for some of the large incidents that they want to report. But you put these things through a place like Illinois, where we're populated as close to buildings as they want to go, there is going to be a rupture. Again, there's going to be one accident, not necessarily a full bore rupture, but one accident for every 1,000 miles of pipeline every year. We ran the numbers for the Navigator pipeline. You can expect it, but if you're close to people, they're going to die. And
those numbers are based upon the PIMSA's database. The PIMSA has a database that the CO₂ pipeline companies are supposed to report every time they have an incident of some sort. And the level of reporting is very suspect. There's one company that runs not only some CO₂ pipelines, but is also a prominent oil pipeline company, and they report every time it hiccups. They have hundreds of reports in there of things that have happened. 2 other companies report quite a few. There are lots of companies that own small pipelines who report nothing at all, not a word from them, and they're just not bothering to report, and PIMSA hasn't bothered to go out and chase them. So all these numbers about one a year are still based on rather unattractive results, databases and so on. So it's very suspect.
Okay, that was the last question for you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you all very much for having us.
Thanks for the opportunity. Contact your legislators. We're getting a bill to stop eminent domain. We need your help. We're very concerned that the people in the Chicago area wouldn't be concerned in protecting us from eminent domain. But after talking to this group tonight, I feel like we have some friends. Because those of us in rural areas are certainly getting targeted with this, and we'd appreciate any and all help. We're hoping to get the bill in certainly by the February 6th deadline. I can't talk about who yet, but we do have legislators on both sides of the aisle that are offering to be sponsors. So I think it's going to be a go. And you're our initial lecture, by the way. So,
good. So yeah, keep us posted on this legislative action, because we know our senators and reps up here. So
yeah.
Thanks, Mark. We really appreciate the help. I've done a lot of Zoom calls. Rick's introduced me to a lot of the legislators up here. So I've talked about all sorts of CO₂ pipeline issues, and I found them to be extremely receptive. You've got a good group of legislators up here.
Great. Bill?
So, Mark, will you give us a closing here, and then we'll turn off the video and we'll turn off the Zoom.
Well,
Okay.
we had a great presentation on CO₂ pipelines, which we needed to hear about, and we need to take action against this. And we're very thankful for Richard and Kathleen to come on and do this. And we hope to see you again soon. And thanks everybody for coming on. And we will meet again in January. We're not going to do a December one because we're going to look at Christmas or solstice or something. And so that's it. Thank you, everybody. Bill?
Thank you all for having us, and thanks for
Thanks
everything you
thanks
do.
for
We really
listening,
appreciate it.
everybody.
Thank you. Happy Halloween, everyone. Happy